I would like this to be a bit of a thought-provoking video, because I think the subject at hand is something that most of us can relate to, probably everyone if they're being honest. And that issue is the regret of feeling that we could have said something and we didn't. And this takes several contexts. It can be in the context of a debate, either a civil exchange of ideas or a heated argument. Or it could be in situations where there's been some sort of trouble and you felt that saying something at the time maybe would have made the situation better or your insight would have been valuable and you regret not having said it for whatever reason. And I'm sure there are other situations where this is the case. But I think it is something that we can all relate to. But I'm trying hard not to beat myself up over this sort of feeling because I think we put too much weight into, frankly, on some level, our own egos in terms of feeling that what we would have said would make a great deal of difference, or put it this way, feel like having said something, feeling better for it. Sometimes it may be that not having said anything is actually the better option, and not just because it's easier at the time, but because it actually might be the better option in the long run. So let me break down a few situations and just how I would interpret them. This is just my opinions. You can feel free to disagree or offer your own insight. I'd be very interested in how other people perceive this. Um, so you're having a debate with someone, and it's about some sort of controversial political subject. It could be divisive. It could be with someone in your own country. So in the UK, it could be the Brexit debate. You know, if you voted Remain and the person voted Leave, or the other way around, and maybe you like the person and you don't really want to fall out over something that ultimately is beyond both of your control. Um, but you feel strongly about the subject and you want to argue your side, and then afterwards you think, well, I should have said that. I should have said this. I should have said that. Should have come with this angle. And it could be an international situation. You could have a friend in another country and you like the friend, but you happen to dislike some of the things their government is doing, whatever it might be. Um, Without giving any precise examples, I've been in this situation more often than not with my Chinese friends. I don't much like the Chinese government. I think it's cruel and oppressive, not to mention dishonest. I could get into a long reason why I dislike the Chinese government. So for that reason, I try to avoid political debates about Chinese matters with my Chinese friends because I don't want to run the risk of falling out over it. Because nationalism is very strong in China, and a lot of people do tend to defend the government. So it's not, I don't want to sort of look at my friends as being government apologists. I want to sort of see them as, well, the reason I'm friends with them is because they're a nice person, they're a generous person, etc. So I really think sometimes a degree of self-preservation is very understandable. You don't want to get into heated political rows with friends because you don't want to fall out with them over that. So sometimes agreeing to disagree or even not mentioning the subject is for the best. It's not necessarily the same as not letting it ever come up. Sometimes it's useful for it to come up just so you know what your differences are, and then that's it. It's done. And you can choose to deal with that how you want, but at least it's done. So that's another very topical form of debate. Now, I'm specific. Excuse me, got a bit of a mouth ulcer. I'm specifically mentioning friends because debating with strangers, it matters far less. You might still feel you could have said something, particularly if it's a one like face to face debate or you've met someone at some sort of function and you think, oh, that smug guy, I should have said something. That smug woman, I should have made this point to her, whatever it may be. But I think that ultimately has less of an impact than feeling you should have said something to a friend because you know the friend. Therefore, it's almost like you want them to know what your perspective is. There's this desire for them to know. I also think there's another very understandable aspect of it. You feel that there is an important aspect of the conversation, the debate, that was relevant to something they raised. So they maybe were quite clever at their debating skill and they asked a certain question and you feel your answer maybe could have been better. You could have, and then you go back and you think, damn, I should have said that on that question. I should have said this on that question. And you can end up feeling quite deflated, feeling a loss of confidence because you think a few things. You think my debating skills aren't very good, and you feel almost that you've betrayed your beliefs. You almost feel like you've betrayed the cause at hand. And when you think about it, it's really ridiculous because unless you are an actual campaigner and you're actively campaigning to change something, or you're an elected representative, or you're in some other position where you can directly have some influence on something, change something, then ultimately a debate, even a political one, is just an exchange of ideas. If you argue with someone on the internet about some topical issue going on in the world, whatever it might be, whether it be Syria, whether it be gun violence, and whatever the issue, you argue heatedly with them, right? Because you feel strongly about the issue. Few things are absolutely true. Number one, you're almost certainly 99.9% highly unlikely to ever see them again. Number two, that debate that you have is unlikely to change anything. It might be useful for pollsters to look at sort of a opinion, but I find they wouldn't even look at international debates on those things. That tends to be domestic. So, does it really serve any purpose other than getting it off your chest how you feel about the subject? And then I think it's this idea that you want the other person to see your way, and if they don't, then they're stubborn, they're arrogant, they're ignorant, and they might well be. But I think we also need to show a little humility and think, well, I don't know everything. Is putting forward my point really going to change their mind? Because after all, how much am I allowing my mind to be changed by what they're saying? So a certain degree of introspection, I think, is important. But this business of I should have said this, it can drive us crazy if we let. Now then there's another type of debate which is more personal. It's got nothing to do with external issues. It's more about like a personality clash. Oh, you're a liar. You're arrogant, you're conceited, whatever it is, and you get this personal argument with friends or relatives, and sometimes it get very unpleasant. I think in those circumstances, particularly, you really do want to say, I should have said that. But again, when it comes down to it, if that was a heated argument, what is really saying a few more things? What difference is that going to make? Now, we know that words have weight, and a single word, a single sentence can take a long time to unravel, to go back from. You know, if you've said something really hurtful in the heat of the moment, a single apology might not suffice. So sometimes not saying something or even forgetting to say something, you need to look at it and think, well, I really wanted to say that and I should have said it at the time, but would that really have made a difference? And perhaps that's true of any time when we ask ourselves this question, would it really have made a difference? And most of the time the answer is no, it wouldn't. It might make us feel better that we said more, but that might be the only thing. And even then, in the long run, it might not make us feel better because you might find because you said everything that you wanted to say, You've broken down the barriers to the point where there's no going back. I mean, you might find that that friend that you argued with, you might really rely on them in the future, and you've said hurtful things, and there's no going back from that. You can apologize, but it wouldn't necessarily change matters. So there are circumstances. I think there's also a moral question. If someone is being bullied and we don't say anything, we're standing in the vicinity and we don't say or do anything and we beat ourselves up, a certain degree of guilt is understandable there because it's a moral thing. You think, well, those bullies weren't that intimidating. I could have said something and I didn't. Why not? I think most people, given a choice between confronting trouble or avoiding trouble, would choose avoiding trouble. And that's totally understandable. It's a human instinct. But sometimes we do put ourselves in a real moral pendulum. We should have said that. We should have stood up for that person. We should have confronted that person. And maybe we should have at times. But I really think it's important not to beat ourselves up too much because most of the time what we say or do won't make a difference. Sometimes it might get someone to think in a different angle. It might, and standing up, for example, for someone being bullied, that's a very noble thing. It might stop the bullies, or it might just end up with two people being beaten up on the ground. So does that really help matters? I don't know. I'd like to think I had the integrity to speak up when I thought something was wrong. But it's not about constantly being a crusader for right and wrong. Sometimes wanting to avoid trouble is not cowardice, it's just practical. So we shouldn't get too wrapped up in the idea that we always have to be moral crusaders, social justice warriors, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it is better just leaving something, letting the other parties involved sort it out. It's not cowardice to avoid the issue. I mean, sometimes okay, sometimes it is. If you see, if there's an individual, I don't know, a man laying into a woman violently, and you're a man and you walk past and do nothing, then you should feel guilty. If I ever do that, may I hope I feel guilty. I hope I feel awful. But I would like to think I didn't. I would like to think I confronted the guy. It's not about being a superhero and swooping in, and it's just about right and wrong. So sometimes intervention is necessary, but even there's circumstances where you do have to be practical. If you're in another country, then you have to be a little bit more cautious about the way you would go about things. You can't be spontaneous because the way it will go down in your own country wouldn't necessarily be the way it goes down in another country. That's very important to think about. So I'll leave it there. But if I have a kind of uniting theme with this video, I guess it is don't be too hard on yourself. I'm saying that to me as well, looking in the camera right now. But to anyone watching this, don't be too hard on yourself. In the debate context, also there's the factor of the other person probably thinking exactly the same thing. Why didn't I say that? But ultimately, you have to say, would it really have made that much difference? Would saying that have made a difference? Would it really have made me feel better? Maybe it would have got me more stressed out because then they would have retorted and it would have got into a heated row. Whereas not saying something means avoiding the debate, means avoiding that stress. And telling that person how you strongly feel about it, what you feel is right, what you feel is the truth, and it might well be, might make them rethink the position, but more likely it's just going to be they're going to want to counter it with something else. And then the question is, well, what has really changed? Have you arguing that point, for example, has that made any changes to the human rights situation in whatever issue you were talking about? Probably not. Like I say, the circumstances you have no choice but to speak out. If you're a politician or you're um, a political campaigner, you have to speak out because people need to know what you stand for, and you need to push through your argument to get things done. But in terms of just arguments with strangers, I mean, it can feel good. It can feel sometimes the way I feel is I want to balance out the situation. If I feel there's a lot of opinions on one side and I think that side is wrong, sometimes I'll leave my comment just so there is a counterpoint of view. That doesn't mean I'm going to hang around to be, verbally lambasted, but sometimes that's an approach. So let me know your thoughts. So I think really it comes down to giving ourselves a break because most of the time it's really not that bad a thing not saying something. Thanks for watching.